Good afternoon, folks. Thank you again for joining our channel this afternoon. As always, we are very appreciative of the fact that you are taking your time to come back and watch us. And if this is your first time watching us, I hope you watch till the end. And if this content interests you, I hope you subscribe. In any case, even if you don't subscribe today, I'm just really glad that you're here. So as you can tell, it's lunchtime here in Karateng. Oh, by the way, for those who don't know, this is our home in Karateng. And currently I'm home with our two supervisors. And my wife will be joining us shortly. So it's lunchtime and I'm getting ready to prepare lunch for all of us. As you can tell, I have, I think, is this coriander? I don't know what they call it in English, but at home we just call it dania. We have what in France we call secoma. And I'm getting ready to boil some beef and we'll make it with ugali, or again in France it's called guan. So this is a very typical Kenyan meal where you have your cornmeal made of corn flour, and then you have your greens, and this I believe should be kales, and then some kind of protein, which for us today is going to be beef. So while the beef is boiling, I'm doing the job I hate the most in the kitchen. I don't have a problem with cooking, but I absolutely do not like cutting vegetables. It's not something I do for fun. I do it because I have no choice. Anyway, so thank you again for coming back to Karateng with us. We'll walk through our lunch routine while I'm talking about the choice between moving to the village and moving to the city. People are asking questions about why it makes sense to move from diaspora straight to the village, why folks choose to bypass the city. And by the way, there's lots of returnees or diasporans who come back home and decide to live in the city. So I'm just going to walk you through the decision points and how we arrive at, how we as a family arrived at the option of the village. And so, as you all know, people from diaspora come back and have all kinds of options. Could be big city, could be a village, could be anything in between. But each choice has very specific implications in terms of benefits and drawback. So today we are going to talk about four things. We'll talk about our personal journey, how we got to where we are, and then I'll talk about some of the options we can compare. We'll highlight factors to consider when making the choice between village and city. And then, as always, we are going to end with a short discussion on some suggestions for people who are thinking about moving to the village. So in terms of our journey, those who are watching this channel for the first time may not know it, but some folks already know. I was born and raised in the village, a village in southern Nyanza called Oyugis. And of course, Karateng really is my roots, and that's where our home is. My wife, on the other hand, who goes by the name Minodede on YouTube, and please check her out. She also has an amazing channel out there too. She was born and raised in Nairobi City. She was actually born in Pumwani Hospital. So she's a city girl through and through. So while culturally we share a lot, we are also very different humans. And I think I'll just set aside a different video for that. City-born folks and village folks can be very different on so many levels. However, we both met in the US, had an African wedding. And in the last 10 years or so, we've both been visiting Kenya very frequently. A while back, we would come once a year. Now we spend a lot more time in Kenya. So we still have roots in the village. She has roots, of course, in Karateng. She has roots where she was born, where her family was raised in Soba. But I have a much stronger connection to the village because this is what my life was, the first 20 years of my life. So when you're comparing city versus village, here are some of the things that typically pop up. Number one, in the village, you tend to have more space and more land. And this land, comparatively, is often cheaper than buying land in the city. In many cases, the villages are far less polluted, except for villages that are close to factories. In Karating, for example, there's barely any factory, and so it can't get any less polluted for us. In the village, of course, you have way more freedom because you're far off in the bush, quote unquote, away from authorities. So there's more freedom to do a whole lot more that you can do that you cannot get away with in the city. So many more freedoms in the village. And of course, within the village, we still really enjoy tight knit communities. If something is happening to a person, neighbors would easily jump in. In cities, in some parts of Africa, that is not often the case. And of course, one big advantage is that the cost of living in the village is often way less compared to the city. Housing, if you're renting, is going to be way cheaper. Many folks actually in the village don't even rent because most people own their own homes, whatever that may be. Water, power, and all that, utilities are often very cheap. And then the cost of labor, way cheaper than the city. Many folks in the village are willing to work for much less. Well, we hope that folks don't take advantage of that, but it's certainly a blessing for people looking to employ folks. The villages are often much safer than cities, in part because many of the city problems don't bleed over to the village. And we are often far removed from the political heat that happens in Kenya or in other parts of Africa. Like recently, when there were demonstrations in cities, the villages, you would not even know that there was anything going on. So it's often safer and a lot more quiet. Cities too have their own benefits. For example, in cities, you have more access to modern amenities. It's far easier for diaspora folks to blend in. In the village, you stand out like a sore thumb. In the city, you could easily blend in and nobody notices you. And of course, there are certain unique hustling options that come with the city because of proximity to government offices, access to foreign missions and things like that. And then, of course, the infrastructure is often slightly better than it is in the village. For example, when you're traveling out of Kenya, likely you will need to travel to the city to live. We may not have those options in the village. Of course, because these cities are cosmopolitan, you meet people from everywhere. In the village, less so. You're less likely to meet returnees. In the city, you're more likely to actually meet returnees going about their own business. And then, of course, cities have better schools, more skilled professionals, and some building materials can be cheaper in the city, especially when it comes to fittings. Because a lot of us in the village have to go to the city to buy fitting materials. Now, here are some of the challenges that come with these two different options. With cities, of course, there are more security problems. You have traffic, you have noise, less freedom because you're closer to government offices, much higher cost of living in terms of land rates or taxes, water, power, labor, food. It's way more expensive. You're less likely to find organic food, with some exception, of course. And then, of course, the issue of overcrowding. That's a unique issue to many cities in Kenya. In the village, too, I would say that there's less access to good schools. Again, depending on where your village is located, then less access to good hospitals, less modern facilities, limited shopping options, more expensive building materials, especially the finishing materials like you talk about gypsum, tiles, and the things that we typically buy in cities. By the time they get to the village, they're often way more expensive. Like for now, cement could be less than 800 shillings in the city. You come to the village, it's more than 1,000 shillings. So things can be a little costly given the distance of travel. And then you have kinship problems because in the village, typically we live around neighbors and family members that have lived with us for a long time. So the problems that have existed over generations are still present. In the city, however, oftentimes you don't even know who your next door neighbor is. And so kinship problems in the village are often present no matter where you are. And then our village roads are not often the best. Sometimes we get what we call disco matanga, which is a disco that is organized when there are funerals. So that's another form of noise that is very unique to villages. So here's why the village worked for us as a family. Because as I mentioned earlier, we truly had the option of living in the city or living in the village. Because my wife is a born city person, is very comfortable in Nairobi, knows her way around. For me, Nairobi is a very foreign world. I have never lived in Nairobi. Typically, I go to Nairobi for whatever business takes me there. When I'm done, I'm out. And I often joke with my friends that the only place I know in Nairobi is some tall green building. And so all I ask is that they don't change the color, because if they do, I'm lost. So we talked about the option of living in the city or living in the village, and we went through a number of factors and finally settled for the village. Now that also does not mean that we don't go to the city. When we in the, I actually just came back from Nairobi 2 weeks ago. Whenever we have a need, we travel to the city, do what we need to do, and then we come back. And also the other advantage we have living in Karateng is that we are only 15 minutes away from Kisumu International Airport. We are only 20 minutes away from Kisumu CBD. So while we are deep in the village, enjoying all the village and amenities, it only takes us a few minutes and we get all the city related amenities. And so here's why we settle for the village. Number one, the village has a very slow pace. All the hustling and running around, we don't have that. And we think that's really good for our mental health. It's easy to just stop, connect with people. You can just be walking around and be talking to people, and that's just what it is. And of course, our stronger ties to the village still sway us in the village direction. The sense of community. Nothing happens in the village without other folks getting involved. It could be a bad thing in some cases, but it helps in many cases where there's a need. Like if robbers come to your house and you make noise, all the neighbors come out. That does not happen in many cities. Of course, the cost of living in the village is really low. So that really helps. And then we've figured out ways to create the city amenities in the village, like finding internet, reliable power, indoor plumbing. We can create most of that in the village without having to move out there. And so, like I said, living too close to Kisumu also helps. And then lastly, the two things is freedom. We really enjoy the freedom that comes in the village, and we don't have to worry about all the political stuff and major crimes that are associated with cities. And so overall, while the city is okay, the village works for us. I hope this was informative. If it was, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next. Thank you.